Hello dear learners, and welcome to today's video lesson where we will continue with the remaining principles in casework. I am Richie Simon, Assistant Professor from the Department of Social Work, DSSS. In our last video, we had learned about 7 of the principles of casework, namely individualization, acceptance, purposeful expression of feelings, controlled emotional involvement, self-determination, self-awareness, and non-judgmental attitude. In this video, we will proceed with the topic and learn about the remaining principles in casework. The first principle that we will discuss today is one of the most crucial principles in casework practice. It is one of the most important principles, and the name of this principle is the principle of confidentiality. The principle of confidentiality says that whatever the client is sharing with the caseworker needs to be kept under lock and key. It should be secret, and its secrecy needs to be maintained. We should not go gossiping about it or discussing the information that the client has shared with us exclusively. We have to keep this information as secret because it is our ethical responsibility, it is our ethical obligation, and any breach might result in the loss of trust and confidence from the client. However, certain situations demand breach of confidentiality, like those situations when the client might become a threat to oneself or to others. Then you may have to reveal the information that the client had shared with you to the concerned persons. This is known as shared confidentiality in the best interest of the client and the others. Having known this crucial principle, let's make a move to the next one, and that is the principle of resource utilization. Now, this principle states that as a caseworker, we need to explore the internal and the external resources available with the client for solving his or her own problem. Now, internal resources refer to those resources that are intrapersonal in nature, meaning to say those resources that the client has with himself, like knowledge, like talent. These are the internal resources, like spaces, while the external resources are those that might be present at the interpersonal or at the environmental level. So something which is outside the client is considered to be the external resource. We as caseworkers need to keep a record that the resources that the client is having can be used for solving his or her problem. This also makes us and the client identify those resources which, though missing, are needed to cope with the problems that the client is facing. We need to enable the client to acquire and utilize these resources prudently. The next principle is the principle of communication. This principle states that the caseworker must be able to understand and correlate the verbal and the non-verbal aspects of the communication that the client is making. The caseworker must be receptive as an active listener, and at the same time, he also needs to be empathetic and should show non-judgmental behavior. This principle also states that communication needs to be made within the framework of the agency, and that any unnecessary promise which goes beyond or outside the framework of the agency must be avoided. So as a caseworker, you should not go on making promises that your agency is not for. Let's make a move to the next principle now, and that is the principle of meaningful relationship, which defines how exactly should the relationship between the client and the caseworker should ideally be. This relationship needs to be professional in nature, and at the same time it should also be balanced as well as reciprocal. Now, in order to establish this relationship, we need to show warmth and genuineness towards the client. With such behavior exhibited by the caseworker, the client will feel that he or she is accepted and will in return show some respect towards the caseworker. This principle also suggests that the caseworker should constantly try to help the client believe in his or her own objectivity and also in the worth of himself or herself. Next is the principle of social functioning. As social caseworker, the purpose of our intervention is somewhere directed towards enhancing the social functioning of the client. And so, we need to assess the different social roles that the client might be facing. So, the client may be playing the role of a father, of a son, or maybe a daughter, a mother, a wife, and so on. We also need to assess and gauge the capacity of the client to perform these roles effectively. And accordingly, we need to shape and mold our interventions. Next, we have the principle of tuning behavior. Tuning means synchronization. Just like the musical instruments are tuned, as caseworkers, we need to tune the body, the mind, and the intellect of the client. That means what the client thinks and analyzes, what the client does and experiences, and what he or she understands, comprehends, and remembers needs to be synchronized. And this sync becomes the responsibility of the caseworker. Last is the principle of social learning. Social learning is vital for the changes that are needed during and after the casework interventions with the client. So, what is social learning? It can be understood in 4 simple steps. First, arousing and focusing the attention towards the concern. After that, the second step, that is organizing and evaluating the problem and planning the future action. Once that is done, we proceed with the third step, that is searching for and acquisition of new information in order to provide opportunities to the client for new experiences, which becomes the fourth step. So, these were the remaining 7 principles of casework. In all, we have learnt the 14 principles which can be used while practicing the method of social casework. So that's all for today's video lesson. Until we meet next, keep learning, keep growing, Stay safe.